Okay, so we are now live. So just want to say good afternoon and welcome to everybody. Welcome to the latest in this series of Black History Month events that we are running here at the University of East London. For those that don't know me, my name is Fitzroy Andrew. I'm part of the Office for Institutional Equity team here at the university, and we are coordinating a lot of the activity that is happening here in relation to Black History Month. And today's topic, if you've signed up, and thanks for doing that, the title says it all really. We are introducing a new movement called Black Men for Change, and their philosophy is very much around the idea of doing for self. So that is very much part of the territory that we want to explore today. And it's a great honor and privilege to be able to welcome two of the prime movers in the movement right now. We've got Jake Ferguson here and we've got Viv Ahmun here. So Jake and Viv, welcome. Thanks for making your time available today. I want to hand over really to you for the first part of the session. Jake, I know you got some slides, but before we get to those, do you just maybe want to say a little bit about yourselves in terms of your day jobs and other interests as well? Because I know you are both men of many talents with a lot of interests as well. So if we start there, and then Jake, I'll hand over to you for the slideshow that I know you've got ready.
Thanks, Fitzroy, and welcome everybody. A real pleasure to be here. Black History Month is a important time of the year. I mean, I like to think that Black History Month is all year round, in fact, but
yeah, indeed.
The purposes of this event very much, welcome the opportunity to speak to your students about what the Black Men for Change movement is all about. But before I get there, perhaps Viv and I can just do a little bit of background about ourselves. So my name's Jake Ferguson. I'm the chief executive of a charity called Hackney CVS, and we're the umbrella body for the 1,500 charities and community groups in the borough of Hackney. For my sins, I'm also a member of the London Mayor's Violence Reduction Unit Partnership Board, so I advise the Mayor and Deputy Mayor about youth violence particularly. I'm also a member of the London Recovery Board, which is looking at post-COVID, or well, still in COVID, what are the collective responses we can do across the public sector and voluntary sector. Part of our job is to be a bridge between public authorities and communities, ensuring that communities' voices are heard and respected. We manage grant programs, we run large-scale programs which bring communities together to deliver a common purpose. And we also do a lot around influencing Met Police. So we have a youth stop and search monitoring group called Account. So if you want to see what young people are doing in the borough of Hackney, young leaders, please go to accounthackney.org. I'd say we probably turn over anything between 2 and 3 million a year, and at least half of that investment goes directly to local voluntary and community groups. In my private life, I'm a family man, as many of you guys are. And I also co-founded a band called the Heliocentrics. So I've been around the world touring and playing with some musical legends like Orlando Julius, who invented Afrobeat, Melvin Van Peebles, famous filmmaker, Madlib, who's a mover and shaker in the hip-hop world in the States, and a whole host of others. Mulatu Astatke, the originator of Ethiopian jazz. But anyway, I'll stop there for England out. Music and my passion, my day job. But I'll hand over to Viv.
Yeah, just to say a word, the Heliocentrics latest set is called Infinity of Now. You really do need to check it out. There is some serious funk being laid down on that album. So just to endorse that particular contribution. Yeah, no, listen, I got it, man. No, it's serious stuff. Trust me.
Well, the new album actually is out now. It's called Telemetry.
Oh, right, another one after that.
Yeah, you're not down.
Okay.
It's moved on.
Gee, I'm behind the times. I'm gonna pay attention to that for sure.
All right, so my name's Ahmun. I have been around for a long time, been involved in a whole range of things. My key interest over the years has been social policy, because ultimately, at the end of the day, it's social policy that ensures individuals and communities are heard, that laws and services are designed to meet the needs of communities. And traditionally, and still today, policies ultimately formed by communities. We've seen during the summer the millions of people marching on the back of the slaying of George Floyd, and we can see how those marches across the globe have begun to inform policy across the board, more domestically in the UK, around the curriculum and historical injustices around mental health, the barriers to healthcare, and a range of other things. So social policies, I say, underpins everything I do. When people say, "Oh, Viv, what are you about?" Because I see you involved in this and involved in that and so on. Well, what really sits at the core of where you're at right now? I always say it's money, tech, and Africa. Money / economics, because you can't do anything in this democratic so-called capitalist system without cash money. And technology, because technology runs through everything. We've seen that on the back of COVID-19 and the lockdown, and that's only going to increase. We know that, for example, nearly 70% of all advertising now runs through platforms like Google, Facebook, and Amazon, and that's only going to continue to increase. When it comes to Africa, it's the same thing. Everything began there. I believe that we're going around in a very big circle back to the continent, whether it be as a consequence of the emerging of the new middle class, which is on the African continent, the consumers of the 21st century, 1.3 billion of them. But also, I think, from my perspective as a black man and a global African, I'm committed to doing my bit whilst I remain here, the few years I have left, relatively, to contribute to the growing of the African continent. I encourage everybody to have a look at the African Union's 2063 agenda, which I'm playing a very small part in revising at the moment, and also what Africa is doing around technology and around communication. All of that wraps up for me into this idea of me being a futurist. And let me unpack that term just a tad. It means that I'm trying to think 11 generations ahead, so approximately 500 years. It's what all the big strategists do, it's what China does, it's what the Pentagon does, it's what Silicon Valley does. They go 500 years into the future and then map back from there. It helps, I think it's a very powerful and sobering exercise. So somebody said to me, what's the most important thing we need to focus on right now? I'd say the planet and the environment, global warming. Yes, George Floyd and all of that's passionate for me and my ethnicity as a black man. That's all passionate, but if we're serious, then it's got to be the planet and what we leave behind for those who come after us. So yeah, that's a really big bit. It's where my head is at right now. But it does zero into what we're going to talk about in regards to Black Men for Change.
Okay, and without further ado, I think let's get on to that. I mean, you had your launch, was it last Friday? Formally last Friday? Was it last Friday? There was a countdown on the website that I saw. Anyway, whatever. So, yeah, Jake, over to you. Perhaps so take control of the screen and look forward to your slideshow.
Thanks, Fitzroy. We're going to walk people through a few slides and then ideally open it up to questions and discussion, because I think that's where you'll get more of the sense of what we're about.
Yeah.
So let me just quickly share my screen. Hopefully you can see that now, Fitzroy?
Yep, got that. Yep.
Okay. So as Viv says, Black Men for Change is ultimately a collective of African and Caribbean heritage men, predominantly based in London, who have come together to make a difference. I suppose it's there in the name. And you can see some of the individuals involved on that slide. Some real heavy hitters from the scene historically. So people like Jeremy Crook, who's the CEO of Black Training Enterprise Network, Pablo Reed, who established the Black Cultural Archives in Brixton. Then you've got people with a very strong local anchor. So people like Asher Senator from Code 7 in Brixton, Courtney Brown from Hackney Haringey, Nana from Haringey as well, and then Des Brown, who is CEO of Sparks to Life in Waltham Forest. Then with any sort of network, you need people who can advise you, people who've got the t-shirt, if you like, who've been on the scene for a long time. And I'm sure people on the call will recognise some of those names. Leroy Logan, former Chief Superintendent in Hackney, founder of the Black Police Association. Actually, people don't know, but John Boyega is playing Leroy Logan in a new film coming out. I'm not sure if it's hit the screens yet or whether it'll go straight to Netflix, but do look out for that. You've got people like Lee Jasper, former Deputy Mayor of London, Tayin Egbetu, who's a serious academic. He's part of an organisation called Legali. Royston, who's a coach, a trainer, particularly around unconscious bias and how you get change within organisations. Then some of our younger advisors, Jermaine Jackman, you may know as the winner of The Voice, but Jermaine in his real life is a serious young thinker who's got a national network of black young people who are looking to make a difference. Tolu Farinto, who's part of an organisation called Utopia, who are engaging corporates around equity and diversity. And then a young man called Solomon Rose, who's the lead for the Improving Outcomes for Young Black Men programme in Hackney, which, for those that don't know, is a really important 10-year initiative to improve the outcomes of young black men, working with the local authority, NHS, the police. And it's the first time I think the local authority, a local authority, has admitted it has issues around institutional systemic racism and is really grasping that nettle and trying to work together to make a difference. So we're going to talk a bit about why Black Men for Change came about, how we're organised, a particular project that's funded by City Hall to work with 80 young people, and then a few extra bits which link into the Black Men for Change umbrella, and Viv will speak more directly about those. So why did we bring Black Men for Change together? Well, I'm sure, Fitzroy, you will know that often it feels like herding cats when it comes to bringing together to talk about the issues which we care about, because we are so passionate. But it's also, we absorb that collective trauma about how black people in this country, African and Caribbean people, have been undervalued, poorly served, undernourished, and often our voice isn't heard. And we can easily work as lone wolves, but working as a lone wolf is dangerous because it means we can be picked off. So I think one of the things that really drove me to establish Black Men for Change was that I could see so many really experienced men around me in my job, and I felt it was really important that we had a forum for us to come together, and we are stronger together than as individuals. We've got a whole range of people in the network now. It's growing to about 60+ members. We've got academics, activists, people who've been on the front line in communities for 20, 30, 40 years. I think another key aspect was that I could see that we really need to pass on our experiences as sort of young elders, let's say, to the next generation. And I'm hoping there'll be people on this call or within the UEL environment that really want to make a difference too. And I would urge them to reach out and potentially join us. So it's a space, it's a sort of confidential space. It's a Chatham House rules space for us to talk about what we really care about and how we can work together to make a difference. And I think that lends itself to, Viv joining the network as a founding member really brought this strong ethos about do for self. We need to take control of this agenda, otherwise others will control it for us. And what we don't want is the state telling us what we need to do to better ourselves. We need to own that. So that's what this network is ultimately about, how we can change the narrative, which so often is negative, and it doesn't focus on us as black people having assets which need to be built on. As I said at the start, I'm a member of what's called the Violence Reduction Unit, which is a City Hall initiative. Ideally, it should be independent of MOPAC and City Hall, but you know, it's part of that architecture. And right from the outset, I could see them making the same old errors as, you know, taking a patronising approach and not talking about race in the context of serious violence. And I've helped to really change their thinking and make them really focus on genuine asset-based approaches. So now City Hall is investing in communities in a way that it's never done before. So coming back to this issue about lone wolves, when we set up initially, it was through a sort of similar workshop type setting. What we realized is that if we couldn't build trust between us, we wouldn't get very far. So a lot of those initial meetings were all about who each other was, what were our common goals and aspirations, what were the principles and ethics by which we wanted to engage with each other. And I think because we invested so heavily in that relationship building, we're now in a really position in that we're now able to attract funds, we're now able to invest in those Black-led community organisations in local boroughs. As Viv said, although we're focused predominantly on the UK, we do think globally, because what's happening in Africa is exciting right now, and our young men in London need to see that and feel it and be able to touch that, because they shouldn't just focus on their ends or where they live. They need to think as citizens of this world, and they have assets, they have a voice that needs to be heard. So I mean, without getting into too much sort of detail, we have an executive committee which is made up of the advisors on that slide that I just saw, and we're now starting to deliver and develop partnerships of local organisations working on the ground. We've got a wider membership that meets on a quarterly basis that sets the tone for what this network's all about. And of course, we have to then liaise with funders, charities, public bodies, and so forth. And as the network grows, we're going to be using our website, social media to talk with the wider African and Caribbean community, because their voices are equally important. So one of the initial projects we took on was a one-year pilot funded through City Hall. So we're 6 months into that pilot now. And what it's aiming to do is to train 80 young people from Hackney, Haringey, Lambeth and Waltham Forest to become young leaders. So these are young men who perhaps are on road currently doing their hustle, or have a risk of becoming part of the sort of usual stereotypes. So we as a collective of leaders want to support them to know what we know, to give them the skills, give them the opportunities to work together. And they're paid, critically, they're paid as sessional leaders to then go and develop activities in their community in a peer-to-peer approach. Viv's one of the key trainers. Viv's got a long history as a psychotherapist, but also as an ethical leader and a trainer. So we're giving the young men the tools to be the best they possibly can be. So we have 4 community anchors across the 4 boroughs. Hackney CVS's role is as the accountable body, the fund holder, the subcontractor. And then we have Black Training and Enterprise Group led by Jeremy, who match mentors and role models to each one of those young people. I think what's really important is all the young people are getting trained in the same way, despite them living in different parts of London. And if it wasn't for COVID, we'd be bringing them all together, doing residentials, really building that critical mass of young, new leaders emerging out of their communities. Another aspect of this is all about something that's called rites of passage. So I'm not sure if some of your listeners know what that is, but there are a range of Black-led organisations across London that are involved in some form of rites of passage. And I think a really good rites of passage programme is something that's centred in African culture, mythology, ethics, and it's about how you support young people to get the best for themselves over a sustained period of time. And we know that change can take 2, 3, 4 years in some cases because of where young people's starting point is. So given there's a number of organisations working in this space, we felt it was really important to bring them together in a cohesive way so that they could be a force to be reckoned with, sharing their different approaches so that we could create a collective offer. What else are we doing? Well, we're about to launch. We sort of got the website landing page, but over the coming months, there's going to be lots of videos, lots of presentations. You're going to hear lots from the young people who are coming up through the leadership ranks. Ultimately, it'll be a place that will be somewhere that people will learn. They'll be able to, they will hear from leaders within our communities. One of our key advisors, Lee Jasper, is working on a new community policing framework to give black people the power to hold the police properly to account. So we're going to be going across the country, talking to different regions, Manchester, Newcastle, the Southwest, and talking to those black communities about what sort of framework would give them the confidence that they can hold the Met to account. We know that there's the IOPC, we know there are safer neighbourhood boards, but they're not really making that difference. So what can we do that we own? Another thing that Viv's been a critical leader in is this thing called Open Minds Alliance, and I'll let Viv talk more about that when he comes on speak next. Part of what we're trying to do with the Black Men for Change network is to feed those community members who so often get overlooked when money's available. So we are developing partnerships, and one of them is around My End, which is a current funding opportunity, and another is around the Youth Futures Foundation, which is all about supporting 18 to 25-year-olds into work and focusing on those furthest from employment. So I'll probably stop there because I've talked enough. I'll just leave this slide up because I think it helps Viv talk more about his work as a psychotherapist and strategic thinker. So Viv, I'll hand over to you. I'm sure you want to talk about your experiences as being one of the founding members of Black Men for Change. But if you need me to switch slides, just give me a shout and I'll whiz back to the first slide perhaps.
All right. No, thanks for that, Jake. And you've touched on a lot of the key points that means I don't have to. So that's great. Now, half the challenge about being around for as long as I've been around is I'm constantly shifting between identities. And I think with regards to, or competencies maybe, I think the one that I really want us to focus on when we're talking about Black Men for Change is my identity as a black man who's been around for a period of time, who wants to give back and set a benchmark and a tone for those coming up behind me. And I think that's what speaks to Black Men for Change most strongly from my viewpoint. I think everybody is coming at it from a different perspective or a nuanced perspective. But for me, it really is about ethical leadership. It's me saying, hold on a minute, this is the example I want to set as part of a collective of brothers. You know, this is the example that I want to set, and it's an ethical one. It's one that says, you know, one, nothing for us without us. Yeah? Too much of that's happened in the past, policies, services, you know, everything you can think of has been done for us without our involvement in it, our development of it, driven by others who have not had our, what's the current terminology at the moment? Lived experience. And we've more often than not just got the run end of it. So whether it's education, health, economics, you name it, it's others developing stuff, often with us not in the room, that they then do to us. So Black Men for Change wants to set the example, and the part that I'm most passionate about is the ethical example. It's the contribution that I'm making to the 4 programs that are currently being run in Waltham Forest, Haringey, Hackney and Lambeth. And as Jake's rightly said, I've got many identities and competencies that I've picked up along the way. One of them is the therapy related one. It's not the one that I'm bringing to those spaces. primarily. The one that I'm bringing to those spaces is that of someone who's striving to be ethical in my leadership role. And in coming with that primary identity, I'm saying to those young men, you cannot be ethical if you're not first looking to yourself, your formative experiences, and how those formative experiences inform how you behave today. Lovely pregnant pause there. It's critically important that we are self-aware. What's the contemporary narrative now? Mindful, you know, or we're exercising emotional intelligence. That means you're alive to how people view you, how what you're doing is impacting on the people that you're engaging with. And as a consequence, you know, you're thinking about whether or not that impact is what you're looking for, whether it needs to be moderated, modified, or even whether or not you're the right person to be delivering that key message. Too often, those who've spoken on our behalf from our communities have been completely lacking in self-awareness. They've not run on content that's congruent with need, but content that's made them feel better about themselves and their inadequacies that we can track back, you know, even unto their childhood. So, you know, that's fundamental to a lot of the work that we're doing at those local authority levels. I would say the villages. I like to talk about our local areas as villages. So when we're working in the villages, the Waltham Forest, the Haringays, the Hackneys, the Lambeths, or more specifically the Tottenhams and the Brixtons, that's what I want us to be focusing on, because what we've got coming downstream is going to make what we've come out of in the last 20, 30 years or so look like a picnic. I want to be involved in shaping the next generation of leaders. I want them to learn from the mistakes that we've made. I don't want them to think it's all style over substance. He's a great speaker, he's, you know, he's charismatic, you know, tells a good joke on the podium, so therefore he must be the person that drives. I want them to think, hold on a minute, how does he communicate with people on a one-to-one basis, on an intimate level behind closed doors? Is he considerate of other individuals for whom, you know, public speaking and so on and so forth may not be their core strength? How is he bringing the sisters through? His soft leadership skills. Can he switch? Or is he just got one gear? Boom, boom, boom. Does he always have to be the person in the spotlight? Or is he able to hang back and facilitate the process that allows for others to come through? Now, I was raised as a Pan-Africanist. And I got all the good food, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. You know, I remember, you know, going up to the Black Bookshop on Green Street. Was it Green Street?
Yeah, sorry, we lost you for a minute.
Yeah, so I remember going to the bookshop up in Tottenham on West Green Road and sitting at the feet of the elders and getting all of that solid food. But there came a point where I realized actually I was getting all of that knowledge, but interpreting that knowledge for my contemporary experiences. They were revisionist in their Pan-Africanist outlook. And I had to then increasingly break away from that and begin thinking about how I make that historical information relevant for me today. I don't want to fall into the same trap that they fell into. I want to work with youngers, and that's why it's great that Jake's flagging up these youngers that we've got as part of Black Men for Change. I want to work with them to ensure that the past experiences, contemporary history as well as, you know, deep history, is reinterpreted to make sense in this contemporary environment. So let me just power down a little bit and link it into the Oak Minds Alliance, which is another network but focused on mental health and well-being, which again is key. It comes back to exactly what I was talking about. And there are two pillars around Omar that we're really focused on driving. One is data poverty, because you see, if you want to get information about just how mad black people are, it's there. They hit the Google and it's there, you know, disproportionately represented in acute psychiatric ward, blah. You just there. If you want to get information about what's causing it, that's a little more difficult to get hold of, because that requires the state to acknowledge that it's playing a critical part in that. If you want to get access to information that tells you about what the solutions are, equally difficult to get hold of, because it requires the state to say, you are the solution, black man. So Omar wants to push the pre-existing data that highlights what we need in order to do for self, but also begin to create more information and data, more of an evidence base that's ours, that we can act on. The second pillar for us as Omar, Open Minds Alliance, is in relation to, it's a two-part piece. So one, our ability to communicate the information to the everyone in our community on an ongoing basis. And that's where the digital platform that Jake made reference to comes into play. But also to make sure that we are not using black and clumping everybody in under that label, or BAME, or any of the other terms that people use lazily, but to really unpack that so that we're clear about what it is we want to achieve in the next 24 months and then beyond that. So the other vertical that we're focused on, targeting and working with our recently arrived African diaspora, many of whom do not see English as their first language. They may be Portuguese or French speaking or otherwise. Really focusing down on those sections of our black community and making sure that their particular needs are highlighted, are unpacked, and they're met going forwards. So they're the two verticals as far as Omar's concerned, and they're emerging, and the digital platform is like a conduit for communicating this stuff on an ongoing basis. And we're not talking about a platform that's just got therapists on it and, you know, that kind of stuff. It's like a high street. It's got everything on there. It's got music and so on and so forth, but everything's coming at you through this well-being and health prism. On the flyer that we've got there, we've got our beloved young brother there, 21, may even be 22 now, I've lost track. Great by name, great by nature. And part of the campaign that we will be running for Mental Health Week next year, trust me, written in his own handwriting, because it's such a critical element of where we're at in our struggle for authenticity within this country, but also within our own families, because as Jake rightly stated, so much of what's been posited on us has been internalized by us. So great saying, you know, I want my family to trust me. You know, I've suffered from clinical depression in the past, so-called. I want my family to trust that I understand what needs to be done for me. And sometimes when I'm saying stuff and it seems a little off the pace, that actually maybe if they pause for a little bit, they'll begin to see it makes sense. I need greater trust from the state, because it seems like all the state wants to do is lock me up or medicate me and let me roam around on the street like an idiot. Also, the same term, trust me, applies to black professionals within the psychological therapy sector and more widely. We're saying, you know, we're not trusted by our employers as black professionals in this space, which is terrible, because it means that we feel that we're constantly being gaslighted. In other words, you know, this idea of us being imposters is perpetuated by them. We don't feel comfortable. We don't feel competent amongst our white peers. And then, you know, black families out in the community and competent to meet the needs of their family from very early on. Mothers, in particularly single parents, are made to feel like they don't have the ability to meet the needs of their families, when we know it's the systematized, systemic, structural, institutional racism that creates the disadvantage and the dysfunction that then drives the inability to strive in the way that we know we naturally can within our communities and with our children. So that's a broad overview in regards to Omar. Some practical headlines. We've got a midterm next steps report that's due out in the next couple of weeks. And really that report just goes over all the research that's been, all the cornerstone research that's been done in our communities around education, health, you name it, the last decade or so. All the recommendations have been flagged up, and the extent to which those recommendations, even when accepted, have just been ignored. You know, don't let people gaslight you. Yeah, they understand what the problems are. They have thus far not been motivated to do anything about it. So that report's coming out in a couple of weeks. And we're also due to launch the ManChat 2 online support groups for black men, because again, what the research shows is black men don't want to go for one-to-one therapy. How are you feeling today? They don't want that. They want to go into a private space, very traditional for us. You look back in our history. They want to go into a tradition, and not just black men, men generally. Want to go into our own private space and chat. We might talk for 40 minutes about football, and in the last 10 minutes, have a bit of a conversation about our concerns around employment, or our anxiety around the COVID and where it's going to end up. And that might be this some amount of the soft feely beast that we're willing to share in that space. We might go for 4 or 5 sessions talking in broad terms about broader issues and not really get into the self. And on the 5th session, spend a whole hour getting really deep and crying and so on and so forth. But we want to do that in our own private space. So ManChat 2 will be launched again within the next fortnight. Very, very, very excited about that. It's done some innovative work in the past, hasn't been treated, I believe, with the appropriate level of respect. It's been praised by statutory services, but they haven't evaluated it, and they haven't invested the right kind of expertise necessary for it to grow. Omar will ensure that that happens under the auspices of Hackney CVS and with its ongoing support. So, I mean, I think I'm going to stop there. Like Jake, I could talk for England and Africa and South America and the rest. And Jake and I was talking about domestics earlier, so I could tell in his presentation, and the same with mine, like, my blood is up. My blood is up. Let me end on this point. For all of you that listen to this now and in the afterburn, you see, when you're doing great things, and when you raise up your head above the parapets, be prepared to be hated. People, especially the ones who are most disadvantaged and most likely to benefit from you doing it, they will not thank you today. Yeah. So you have to be confident in yourself. Your self-belief has to be without bounds. Yeah. In order for you to be able to step up and take up the leadership role, particularly in the climate that we are in, because people will be looking for that lightning rod. They're looking for somebody to kick, and it's going to be us, because we're the people they can see. Thank you.
Okay, Jake, really, thank you.
Inspirational as always. Right, so I stop sharing screen. So
yeah, that would be good. I'm guessing that there will be questions from our audience, and I don't want to preempt them, but there are 2 things that I'll just ask, which maybe will kind of open things up, and both relate, I think, particularly to what Viv was saying, and what you said particularly about the ways in which you enable men to come together and share and open up, I think was very powerful. We will all have been in different spaces where we've been able to facilitate that. Given that, and I'm thinking particularly about the composition of our audience that we have here now, and thank you to everybody that's here, and do stick around for the conversation and engage in the questions. I'll put the question simply: where is the scope for women to engage with and support Black Men for Change?
Viv, do you want to talk about the work you're doing with Women's Resource Centre around the increasing impact of domestic violence as a result of COVID and long before that?
Sure. Let me start with the strategic position. So, I mean, Jake's the master at this. He consulted far and wide. I mean, Fitzroy, you know what I can be like, and many of us of that ilk. But he took the time to consult widely with a range of organisations and individuals in order to, get the permission to call Black Men for Change into existence. A really, really important point. And one of the things in a very early meeting that Black Men for Change charged me with the responsibility for taking up is to make sure that when we step into the public, officially, because we're not yet, this is all soft launch type stuff.
Okay, gotcha.
It's around the women's agenda. So we've got a statement that will be coming out soon, again, as part of the formal launch, around and to do specifically with our position on domestic abuse and domestic violence within the Black community. Traditionally, and also in regards to the spike we see at the moment. That statement will be put out in partnership with women's organisations. There's two of those are Black women's organisations. One it's called Forward, and it's an international organisation for women, Black women particularly. So that's the first one. The second one is around the work that a number of organisations have been doing within the Black Men for Change family, Father to Father being one of those, to begin to really lean into the levels of support that we provide for men who, in the midst of their distress, whether it be their early childhood experiences or their current experiences around employment and so on and so forth, turning to their family and offloading those frustrations inside of the home, what support we can give them, not just within the family space, but also where it ends up within the court environment, giving the court a key organisation like Father to Father, giving them a key organisation like Father to Father to refer these brothers to. And then the last point in terms of Black Men for Change, in terms constitutionally, in terms of its governance, we have a range of allies. Somebody in the chat room made reference to allies. A range of allies, female organisations, individual women, and white men who will be supporting the membership going forwards. The majority of people that we've spoken to understand that, especially at this really challenging time, it's critical that we have an organisation like Black Men for Change that shows Black men in a unified way, managing the issues strategically and sensitively on the ground, going forwards. Hope that answers some of the questions. Anyway.
No, and to be clear, I mean, I'm absolutely 100% behind that. I think it's vital that there is a visible collaborative space for Black men, and that place existing does not negate or deny or cut across or undermine any other space. But there is a legitimacy to it in its own right.
Yeah, and we're not defensive about our existence.
Yeah,
we're proactive about it. So what I've told you is what we put in place from the outset. We asked for permission to come into existence. From our ancestors, we looked at the traditions, from the sisters around us, particularly those that are driving women's organizations. In fact, one of my business partners, Patricia Lamore, runs GIDA, which is a global women's organization, big, powerful women on the UN, World Bank, and all the rest. They are playing an integral role in the development of Black Men for Change and holding us to account. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. I have another question, but I'm going to hold that back because I want to go to our audience that are here. And a couple of people have posted in the chat. So Kelly and Mandy, you both posted comments in the chat. I wonder whether you would either want to maybe come on mic and speak to those some more, or maybe I can just read them out because they're self-evident. It's entirely up to you. Kelly, yours is first. So You might want to go first.
Hi there. Thank you for today. I'm sorry I jumped in quite late, but yeah, I think my comment was to do with something I actually heard the other day, working with a group who are trying to do white anti-racist work and are in position of talking to people where their patients are from various places, and found themselves in this position where they had to toe the company line, so to speak, where they assumed because one was black and young, they were going to be more aggressive than the other two older white clients, and therefore were being administered stronger drugs for the young black person. And I just heard this white ally really struggle with what to do in that situation, because what I pointed out is that there's always this situation where you have to choose between, it's always down to, is it me or you? Because if she stands on her beliefs, that's the end of her job. If she doesn't, that means that there's somebody who is getting a treatment that that is not consistent with what that person needs. So yeah, so I mean, I missed the beginning, so I don't know how much of that you might have addressed in terms of support for people in this situation, with what do they do in when they're in that situation. And also I'm a psychology major, and we're all talking about the impacts that we're going to make once we leave, and it's so important that we all get an understanding of the biases and the institutional racism that dictates how we're going to deal with clients in the future. I just think that it's really important to kind of understand the stakes that are there when we graduate and we practice, and what we're really having to fight against. So yeah, I'm gonna stop now before I babble.
Really good point. Before Viv comes in, just because this is a key issue. It's, you know, who has agency to be able to deal with those sort of situations. And, you know, if I was somebody who was a mental health practitioner, I would be looking to my CEO, my board, for guidance, and I would be expecting them to create the environment by which these sort of challenging pushback conversations need to happen. I think one organisation that's going through that process at the moment is East London Foundation Trust. They've been doing some really good work around structural racism, equity and diversity, and if you want, Kelly, I can put you in touch with somebody who's leading that. Viv's on the ELFT board, actually, so I may have a view from a board perspective. But you're right to pick up on the issue of the over-medicationed black young people. I think it's part of a broader global problem of, you know, which a lot of people are calling Afrophobia. They fear us as black people, and therefore the responses are always way too strong, when actually things could be resolved in a more therapeutic and progressive way. And people are experiencing this across the country. The same rules apply when it comes to policing. We're being over-policed. In terms of business, we're being undervalued. And it's this global fear of the black man, you know, and we need to show that there are alternatives. There is a different way of doing things, that we are one, and being one means that we treat each other with mutual respect. But Viv may well have some more clinical perspectives on your issue. I mean, it's certainly an issue I'm live to, and it needs change.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think Yeah, I think it's not a clinical issue, it's a policy issue. And like you said, Afrophobia is at the root of it. Omar, has been brought into existence not to deal with service delivery. It's not delivering services. It wants to address the strategic and policy orientated culture within these institutions. That's why it's coming into existence. And you've highlighted one of the perennial issues that's I know it's been there for at least 30 years or so. And we need individuals like you to be actively involved now as you're coming through and moving out into practice. We've got people like Jackie Dyer, in senior position within the NHS. I'm actually on one of the working groups that's looking at career pathways for individuals like you, who want to get into roles like yourself going forward, so that the colour of the individuals in roles like yours, changes much more significantly going forwards. Too often, the people that are making the decisions just don't have the competence necessary to make decisions about our health. And rather than constantly trying to address their so-called unconscious bias, increasingly we will just want to do for self. So getting that line in there, I think it's critically important to understand that that's our strategic objective. And then where we have allies, because I think that's a good point you raised, then we want to be coaching them. We want to be advising them. And Jake advises and coaches a hell of a lot of allies, as do I, and I'm sure Fitzroy as well. Not just informally, because in the past, a lot of the time we've been doing it behind closed doors, but formally. Pay us to advise you so you make the right decisions, and pay us well, because that if you're serious about shift and being an ally, that's what's going to require. Please do contact me separately. Fitzroy's got my details. I can tell you more about what Omar's doing. We've got a journal that we're going to be launching next year. We want the next generation of individuals like yourselves to play a critical part in that.
Okay, thanks, Viv. Okay,
Thank you.
Okay.
There's a question being posted by Mandy, and she's okay for me to read it out, and she's also developed it to some extent as well. And the question as asked is, how do we encourage more Black men to tap into resources such as ManChat and the organization Black Men for Change, and to develop that? The observation, which in a sense my question was kind of based on initially, was about the makeup of the audience that we have here, which is with one very notable exception. How you doing, Savio? I'm glad you could join us today, bro. But the audience that we have here is predominantly female, and you will know that you go to a lot of events where we're talking about wellness, mental health, whatever the language that you want to use. Women seem, and I take the point, it is about appearance, but I guess I'm much more active and present and visible in engaging in the conversation much more than men. It feels as though there's the routes that you have to take in order to engage men. You can engage them, as you said, Viv. Sometimes it's in a much more of a private space because of all manner of reasons. So that question there, how do we encourage more Black men? And then what does that mean in terms of having conversations like these where men are much more visibly present?
I mean, look, I belong to 6 men's groups on WhatsApp, 6 men's groups, and 2 of those groups were instrumental in helping me to manage my mental health and well-being during the COVID lockdown, because I don't care how well you present yourself in public, this is uncertainty for everybody, right? And it manifests itself in different people in different ways. And one of the groups, is full of, 6-figure, 7-figure, 8-figure earners, all Black men. And we supported each other in that space. All kinds of issues where one of us, his dad was in hospital, with this thing, and it looked like he was going to pass. We were there actively supporting him. And when he pulled through, we were there to celebrate with him. So it's not that we're not involved as Black men, it's just we involve in the ways that work for us. Don't think those young Black men are out on the road right now aren't pulling support. It's just not in the ways that the state and others might want them to do it. They're pulling it from each other. My issue is the SPA that they're talking to about their issues may not be able to provide his mate with what he needs. So how do we get the tools to them so that they can more effectively support each other? The session that we had last week, Saturday, at Jake's headquarters was powerful for me, because what Hackney CVS had been able to do is create a space for these black men to form their fellowship over time, so that when I came in with a heavy food, they were able to eat it all up, and for it to then further tighten their relationship and how they work with each other going forwards. That's all we need to do. Where they already exist, we go in and say, look, let's give you a little bit more. You continue to do what you're already doing. Let's move away from this perception that black men aren't supporting each other. We've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah. No, I hear that.
It's Black History Month, yeah. So we were dispersed throughout the diaspora, and we supported each other. And I would argue we've gotten stronger during that period. Right. So it's an upbeat narrative, ultimately. And what we're arguing is these are the additional things that we need in order for us to move us forward in the 21st century. Okay. We all get our stuff in different ways. We want to make sure that the way that men get their stuff right now is acknowledged. So Men Chat 2, part of which is being driven online, up until very recently, wasn't acknowledged as an effective means of providing some kind of therapeutic intervention.
Yeah.
We're working to make sure that it is acknowledged and appropriately financed.
Yeah.
I would just add to that, Viv, because that was a really vivid perspective, very real, very true. I think the other thing is a lot of young black men don't like some of the terminology that the state uses.
That's interesting, yeah.
Many will not see health as something that is anything about them. And I think we've got to do is to look at the sorts of therapies and interventions that allow people to disclose in a way that they feel safe to. I'm not sure if some of your colleagues on the call, Fitzroy, know much about Tree of Life, but that's been a really good group therapy tool, although we don't call it group therapy when we're talking to the young men. But as a way of understanding self in a group format, really helps. It speaks to people's natural instincts and assets. So it's a softer way of bringing out some of those deep inbuilt traumas. The last thing that a lot of these young men need is a overly clinical response, because they'll just push back in the same way they do with many other parts of society, and you just get stonewalled. So how do we create an environment of trust? And I think, as Viv said, having those circles of trust, having those spaces where men feel free to disclose, it's amazing how powerful that can be. And it creates that sense of brotherhood and, oh, you've been on the same journey as me, or your journey, I can see elements of my life in your journey. That is more powerful than paying £400 an hour for some professional to come and tell you what's wrong with you. You can work that out for yourself, frankly. So I think for me, the whole mental health landscape needs to change. And I think some of the work that we're doing for Open Mind will really kick the door in. And I think in 10 years' time, the rest of the country will be looking back and going, why did we just not do that stuff before? So I think we really will be making a significant change. And I think colleagues on the call, if you're wanting to get into psychotherapy or mental health support, be brave and take that natural instinct with you, because it's probably more likely to be right than wrong.
Okay, powerful stuff there. Okay, I'm gonna just intervene at this point. Savion has posted a comment in the chat, and it reads to me as something that's pretty important. So Savion, we've had some conversations previously. I just wondered whether it's something that you feel you want to say a little bit more about here, because it just feels so germane to the topic of conversation right now. And if you don't, that's okay. You know where I am, so you can reach me as well. But just given that you put it out there, I just wondered whether you wanted to say some more.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, for Fitzroy for this event, and thank you to Viv and to Jake. You know, the thing is, I don't want to offend anybody, but I'm part of that group where I look at language and I look at the whole social construct in how we've been defined from the terminologies used, such as white, black. And I understand that it has, you know, you can place it in its historical context, but I think a lot of West African and Caribbean people that I speak to are choosing to redefine themselves. And I suppose it stems from that question of who am I? You know, am I a black man, you know, quote unquote black man, or am I a man classed as black? So I don't know if it resonates with you or with anybody, but I've been having this sort of like duality and this dualism of, and even the confusion actually, even to the way that I spoke. Like, for example, when I was younger, you know, people used to think that you know, they used to call me a coconut, so to speak, or they used to say, "Oh, you don't speak black," or yeah, I'm just coming out from, you know, my own experience, but I think that these kind of spaces are just very important. So, and that's where I've had this kind of crisis of identity, because ultimately, you know, I don't fit the, you know, the popular narrative of this identity, I suppose. And I've said it to Fitzroy of, I'm black per se, and I understand the historical context of the Black Power movements of the 70s. But I think I'm in agreement with like Trevor McDonald, who wrote an article, I think it was a few years ago, and he said that, you know, the terminology black, it's not an expansive enough word or terminology, and he was saying that we need to identify ourselves as a nationality, or even look at identities of the past. So, hey, I just put it out there.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, listen.
I think it's a really important point, Savion, and in many ways, you know, I think we need a whole session, a separate session on identity and terminology. There is some really interesting work happening in Hackney, being led by Toyin, one of the strategic advisors to Black Men for Change, about that very thing. He's joined by people from the Cultural Archives team in Hackney Council, because Hackney Council are very much keen to make sure that the terminology is right and respectful. At the end of the day, we're all humans. That we cannot deny. That's what binds us all. And we all have a heritage stemming from Africa, as far as the evolution of the human race is. And I find that actually we can sometimes wear different labels for different circumstances. I think when I talk about being black, I talk about that unity of joining, and again, people of colour is a term that many academics do not like to see used, yet is used so liberally and widely in the States, because the state has had such a polarised racial society. For me, race is a modern construct, and that's what we're wrestling with. So as somebody who is of mixed heritage, I think is a term you can use. You certainly shouldn't use half caste. So for me, I'm a northerner, you know, and I came from Lancaster, where I was one of 2 or 3 black families in a population of 50,000-60,000. Just saying black was a shock for people. And weirdly, in the north, you were treated as a novelty as opposed to somebody to be scared of, because you literally, most people hadn't seen somebody who looked like you. I think when we are doing our thing, we've got to make sure that we don't let what we look like hold us back, so that we can garner the respect of our colleagues in the room. And I think, for me, I don't mind what people label themselves as, so long as it's a label that they genuinely feel comfortable with, because that will show in how they then behave and interact with others. But maybe Viv will have a view on this as well. But I definitely think at UEL you should be supporting your students to have these conversations, because it's only through the conversations that we'll arrive at various positions of mutual understanding. What I can do, Fitzroy, is I can forward to you the work that's happening in Hackney that we've helped to give birth to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It's a live debate, and I think many institutions are going through the same conversation. So it's important we have the conversation, not necessarily all being in agreement, because I think, you know, we will all have different experiences.
Yeah. Viv.
Yeah. My PhD was in identity and difference, actually. So in whatever season it was at the forefront of my mind, and you know, much of what Jake's touched on was central to that work. You know, white women with children who were perceived by others as black or dark or whatever, you know, needing the tools necessary to support their children and enable their children to grow up with a positive sense of self. I think 25 plus years on from that, my approach to things is very practical and common sense, and it comes back to where people are. So if how you perceive yourself is healthy for you, then it's not for me to try and disavow you of that, you know, self-concept. That's not my job. But if you're in conflict, then it is for me, if I'm able to widen that out for you and help you to find a place that is comfortable for you going forwards. Jake's already said this big debate, and it's going to continue to be a debate. It's been a debate for as long as I can remember. And, you know, I spend probably as much time on the African continent nowadays, Zoom-wise, as I do in the UK or in Europe. And you're right, in Africa, it's all about, you know, African Caribbean, African heritage, and then nationality on the back of that. The black thing doesn't even come into the equation, and the movement is against using that term. Now, in the UK, there's a historical backdrop to black, and it's that it was a political term that included individuals of African Caribbean heritage and Asian communities. And that was a political and strategic drive that to an extent, still exists. On a day-to-day basis, you know, I'm focused on getting the job done. And I think we've articulated some of what that job is. You know, I want, you know, Kelly and Sultana and all the other individuals on this chat and everybody else to be confident in their skin and their fluid identity, whichever one they want to lean on at any point. So Jake said he's a Northerner. I'm a Londoner.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm proud. I love being a Londoner. Yeah. But after, you know, 30, 40 years or so, you know, we're training around talking therapy and my experiences politically and otherwise, and so on and so forth. I've been able to arrive at a place where my identity is genuinely fluid, and I lean into whatever aspect of who I am is relevant at the time. And helping others coming up behind us to do that maybe faster than we were able to, I think is part of our calling, part of the legacy work going forwards.
Yeah, got that. That's so important. And that kind of dialectic, you negotiate who you are every single day in relation to the environment you're in. You can't help that, and you can't ignore that, because to remain in conflict about that is the definition of confusion. And I mean, you can't be you if it's constantly in flux. There has to be a point at which you can get some coherence around the different aspects of you, and there will always be different aspects of you, and that's fine. That's what it is to be human.
And it's not even that we're saying, I don't think we're saying that it can't be in flux. What I'm saying is we understand why. Yeah, we understand why. I mean, Kelly's just talked about being a Bristolian. you know, the home of the toppling of statues. Yeah, and that's how it should be. We should be able to draw on aspects of our you know, dynamic and multifaceted identities that work for us at any given point in time. You know, Bristol's also the home of, you know, the oldest, you know, black communities in the UK, and you know, when you go into the graveyard in Bristol, you know, you can see that there've been, you know, there were black people that were buried in that graveyard hundreds of years ago. So it's really powerful to have a sense of self historically, as well as contemporary knowledge of self, which what I touched on before when I was talking about Omar. Having enough peers around us that can help us at critical points, I think, is often talked about in terms of mentoring. I think it goes beyond that, and definitely, again, it's what we're trying to re-envisage within Black Men for Change. You know, what else can I do to provide support for these youngers that are coming up in an environment that's, you know, infinitely more chaotic than it was when we were coming up, you know, with the internet and Trump, Dare Our City, and everything else.
Yeah. Okay. I have one further question that I do want to put into the conversation, but before I do that, I just want to check in with other members of the group, maybe those that have yet to ask a question, if there's anything that you're hearing in what we've been speaking about so far that you'd just like to offer a thought on, or whatever else is on your mind. Okay, maybe whilst you're thinking about that, let me come with the additional question. This really comes from a conversation that we had at this time yesterday in a very similar space. And I don't know whether Jake or Viv, you're familiar with Rob Barkley.
Yep.
Yeah. So the work that he's doing at Blackout, and there'll be some research that he'll be publishing very early next week. He was hoping to have it ready for this week, but he's still working on it. And I think he'll have taken some things away from the conversation yesterday. But he kind of left us with a bit of a challenge, which I feel kind of honor bound to articulate. And it may be something just to take away. So this is not an ambush in any sense. It's just asking the question. But his standpoint is really around black gay men. Yeah. And I suppose so my question would be about, where is that within the conversation and the narrative that you are having around black men? Because in this month of Black History Month, it's important for us to be inclusive of all of the different shades of blackness. And the history is arguably that black gay men haven't always been visible within that history as well. So I just wanted to put that to you.
What's the question, though?
The question is are black gay men incorporated into the dialogues that you've been having thus far, I guess, if I want to put it at its simplest.
Should I jump in first, Jake?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's interesting how we can inadvertently, because of the context that we're functioning in, sensitize different aspects of who we are. Yeah, or different sections of our community, whether it be women or young people or people from up north, or, you know, Caribbeans against Africans and so on and so forth. I think I'll speak for myself first, because, you know, Black Men for Change is a network. You know, I mean, I can't speak for everybody in there. I can definitely speak for the executive of 14 or so individuals, without a doubt. And I know Jake will follow on from what I've got to say. But when you're talking about black men and the intersectionality that they have to address, so it's even more important that we lean into that. The prejudice that we experience is internalized. You know, the work that I have done in Australia only served to reinforce it for me. You know, we see more violence in our homes as a consequence of the violence that we've been subjected to for generations. So if you talk about a black gay man who's been abused within the white system, abused within the white gay community, and then abused within the black community, you can see that there's even greater need for support and allyship. So for me, it's just very straightforward. The conversations go backwards and forwards. I mean, I did a lot of work in that area 20 years ago. In fact, I'm meeting with a dear friend of mine, Jan, who used to be the chair of name's gone out of my head just as I was about to say Stonewall.
Yeah.
And some of those conversations have been flagged. She's a white woman who, you know, recognized her sexuality, you know, after raising 3 children with a husband and all the rest of it. And what can be done? How can they support in terms of allyship? So I think all of these areas are highly sensitive areas that people are scrutinizing in great detail. We've got to have the confidence and the authenticity in terms of where we're coming from to be able to lean into it, you know, in order to get the outcomes that we want to see going forwards. So that's my general observation around all of that.
Jake, anything that you wanted to add to that?
I think as chair, I mean, I just sort of more formally, we have a set of ethics that mean that we have equal value in that network. And I know part of the Black Men for Change, there's a number of men who identify as gay or from the LGBTQ community. We haven't got a subset of members in a specific grouping around their sexuality at this stage. As we grow and as we expand the membership, it may well be that we do want to make some specific spaces, but the last thing we want to do is to put people in boxes or do anything that's tokenistic.
Sure.
What we are, the collective of men brought together by how we look and a certain sense of shared lived experience. So from my perspective as chair, we would have a zero tolerance approach to any discrimination between us, whether that's to do with gender, race, because obviously within the African diaspora there's so much variance as well. So, you know, we could easily find ourselves in combative mode about are you an African or a Caribbean? And I think what I'm keen to do is that we create a safe space for people to be able to be who they want to be.
Yeah.
Because if we don't, we're reinforcing the problems that Viv and others are so minded to talk to. Yeah. So I would be very proud of our journey thus far in that it is being very inclusive.
Yeah, and just to be clear, this wasn't about saying you should have black gay men in. I think the conversation was really about some of the challenges that are present for black gay men in being out there, and it literally does come down to your neighbours, and is it safe for even me to be out for my neighbours? And that's in the context of a much wider conversation about sexuality, which you might presume there is much more of a liberal atmosphere around. Well, it ain't necessarily so. And in the sense that when it'd be good to tune into Rob's work when it comes out next week, because he will develop a much more detailed narrative about that. But he was interested in the conversation we're having today, so I just thought it would be great to just kind of feed that in as another angle, as it were. Excellent. Okay, I can see something. Is it in the chat or elsewhere? No, let me just check here. Okay, Kelly has just said we're about to have a class in 5 minutes on intersectionality. That all sounds good. Crenshaw will come up in that lecture then. Yep. Okay, just wanted to check in on our audience whether there's any other points that you wanted to make. Sultana just come with a point. How do we as students exactly participate towards this initiative? This initiative being Black Men for Change, I'm assuming, Sultana. Yes, that's right. Yeah. So that's the direct question. How can students contribute towards the initiative?
Well, I definitely think once we start to expand the website, I think it would be really good to perhaps come and film a conversation amongst your students talking about the issues that Black Men for Change are focused on. You know, we could have some space on the website, on the social media platforms to facilitate that. Although we are the founders of the network, we don't want to own this as much as anybody else. So it's how your students might want to contribute, and we could maybe have a follow-up conversation that could go into more detail, because obviously we have a few minutes to go. We probably can't cover too much. Yeah. Viv's playing a lead role in the comms strategy, and you know, we very much want to share our learning, our experience with the wider academic community. One of your lecturers, senior lecturers, Ian Joseph, is part of Black Men for Change, and he's also helping us evaluate our first pilot program. So some of the learning, and perhaps Ian could even host a session within the university about his experiences of being involved in this initiative, because I think, you know, there would be a lot that would come out there about his experiences within academia. So, you know, Ian's been a very vocal supporter of the need for change and how power differentials within academia can prevent African and Caribbean development. So that could be a different way that you guys could get involved as well.
Just a practical point following on from Jake, Black Men for Change will have a newsletter, and people can give us their details now, add that to the database, so when the newsletter is launched soon, that will go out to them.
Okay, right. So we've got literally a couple of minutes. So I just wanted to give Jake and Viv, yourselves, just literally a final words. Just I guess what would you want our participants here to be taking away as a nugget? Maybe for those that are going into a lecture about some of this stuff, is there anything that you might want them to be feeding into the conversations that we have here in the lecturing space? Since you'll appreciate that this is some of the territory that our students are dealing with, and I think the more that we can empower them to bring perspectives, the better.
I think I'll just say one or two things. One is follow your gut. You know, instincts are there for a reason, and you're usually right.
Yeah.
Without being
with that
patronising. You know, your gut tells you what really should be happening. And then coming back for the do for self philosophy, if you can join others with a similar mindset, you will be stronger together. Viv, I'm not sure if you've got any words of wisdom. I know you've
well, more words of wisdom. We've had plenty.
I'm rinsed out. No, Jake said all the key points. I've put the email address for Black Men for Change in there, so people could send their details through to that, and we'll just add it on. I've got a term that I use, and it's slow, quick, slow. We're always trying to get stuff done really quickly, fill a gap, meet a need. It's as much to do with our own insecurities as the fact that we're aware of, you know, how bad things really are. I think we need to take our time often to get things right before we move to quick. And Black Men for Change means to be around for a long time. It means to be a institution within our community, and we're working on making sure we get that right.
Yeah.
So, you know, be a part of it going forwards. And I valued speaking today with, you know, you next generation, because that's ultimately what Black Men for Change is about.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to draw things to a close. I mean, I've known both of you for varying lengths of time, and we've just not been able to connect as often as we would have done. So for that reason alone, I've really valued today, and, you know, just the wisdom and the insight that you brought has been huge. So thank you, both of you, for making your time available. This isn't the end of the conversation by any stretch. You know, we'll continue to develop links. Ian will clearly be a part of that as well. I want to say big thanks to those of you that have been here in attendance today. Thanks for your insight and energy, as well, and the enthusiasm that you brought. There will be a recording of this event available this afternoon, certainly, hopefully within the next hour. I should be getting to work on that as soon as we're done here. So once again, thank you very much for your time. Have a great weekend and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Beautiful.
Bye-bye.